Hello, want to do a quick video on a game I just played recently, and actually it's the first game I have played in the new year, and will likely be in my top 10 games of 2022 already. I'm making that claim, and that is 300 Earth and Water by Yasushi Nakaguro from Nuts Publishing. This came out, I believe, last year, and is a pretty small game. Here's my hand for scale. You know, it's like a little mini box game, essentially. Opens sideways, which is kind of interesting. Cool box art on it. But this is a pretty minimalist war game about the Greco-Persian Wars of the 5th century BC between Greece and Persia. Obviously, Greco-Persian, in case you didn't know what that meant. I actually won this in a contest, a social media contest that Nuts Publishing was doing. They asked a question on Twitter, I think, of like about one of their obscure games that I happened to own, and so I answered it, and so I ended up winning this. This was on my radar before I won it, just not so heavily, and then I got a chance to play it after the New Year, like the day after New Year's, and I love it. It is such a cool design about this particular conflict. It is essentially the entire Greco-Persian War across, 2 or 3 rulers, playable in 30 minutes. It's got a really cool, simplified system, really easy to teach and play, but also very interesting gameplay. So to start with, this map, let's talk about that for a second. I love the artwork on it. I love the projection of the Peloponnese and the west coast of Turkey, of Persia. And I love how each of the cities, you got Naxos and Sparta and Corinth here. They've got different images representing those cities in there. You've got fantastic portrait artwork of the Persian kings, Darius, Xerxes, Artemisia. And then on the other side, you've got the same for Miltiades, Themistocles, Leonidas on the Greek side. And what's cool about these pictures is that they actually represent once per game events that will happen, or in the Persians' case, twice per game events that will happen in the course of the game. The game is played across 5 turns, which are called campaigns, although some of these turns could be cut short based on the card draw. And you see this deck of cards here with these nice rear illustration, the eagle versus the lion. And then, just these wooden pieces and these tiny colored dice. So the Greeks are and the Spartans are in red. The Persians are in blue. It's a point-to-point game. And like I said, playable in 30 minutes. Essentially, the goal of the game is to have the points, much like Twilight Struggle or any other zero-sum game, have the points marker on your side of even at the end of the final turn of the game, or achieve an instant victory. And there's a couple, both sides can achieve an instant victory by capturing both of the opposing factions' home space. So Athens and Sparta, those are both captured by the Persians win. The opposite goes for Ephesus and Abydos as well. So the gameplay is pretty simple. It is made up of a turn of 4 phases. That first phase is actually really cool. So each side is going to get a certain number of essentially talents or money that they're then going to use to purchase resources for the upcoming campaign. So you can buy cards, you can buy units, army units, or you can buy fleets, which are these discs. And I should also mention that, these discs exist in the ports, which are these circles around certain cities. There is naval movement in this game as well as land movement. So you can spend your money, and every turn the Athenians and Spartans will get 6, and the Persians will either get 10 or 12. They'll get 12 normally, but they'll only get 10 if they decide to hold over a card between turns. So if they do hold a card, they get 2 less talents with which to play on the following turn. So it's a really interesting strategic choice for them. You can see that based on the unit pools and what's already out there, that the Persians have the overwhelming numbers. So it's asymmetric from the force number perspective, but there are some interesting game mechanics that I'll get to in combat that kind of even things out. The Persians also have the ability to build this pontoon bridge, which was historically done here at the Hellespont, to connect those 2 locations so that the armies can march across into Macedonia, into Thrace, Pella here, and then on down towards Athens. This one costs 6 talents, so it's basically half of a turn of income, and it does make the Persians' life a little bit easier because it does allow them to trace land supply, which is something that they will both sides will have to do at the end of the turn. So once you're done preparing for the campaign, you buy what you want, including cards, and then you start going back and forth playing those cards, and I'll show you an example of what those cards look like. So here's what the cards look like. They're dual use, one side for the Persians, one side for the Greeks. And so when it comes time to play a card, you can play a card for the event. So in here, you just do what it says. You play the card and play it for the event. Or you can choose to play the card to move units on the map. And so every card that you play that isn't the event, you get to choose one space on the map and then move those units. So you could move, units up here by land. Army units can move by land. Naval units can move to any port. They move into a port where there's a enemy fleet. There'll be a sea battle. And then naval units can also transport land units, and so you can do an amphibious landing. I could move them here to Eritrea, for example, and take control of that city. You control a city if you have units in it. There will be certain card effects sometimes that cause revolts or loyalty to the Persians or other types of effects that put cubes, units in those cities. The obvious result of all of this is that you will eventually get into a combat with some units. So let's say, for example, that... Let's say, for example, we've got the Persians here with 4 units, and they're trying to take Athens, which has 3 units in it, and they play a card and they move in. Well, then you have combat. And so combat is very simple. Each side rolls a number of dice equal to the number of units they have, up to the 3, essentially. So both sides would roll some dice. Here, I'll just do this right now and show you. And the winner of the combat is the person that rolls the highest number, the highest single value on a die. So here, in this example, the Greeks rolled a 6, and the highest value that the Persians rolled is a 5. So therefore, the Greeks would win, the Persians would take a loss, and then both sides have the opportunity to retreat or continue the battle, and then we would roll again. So let's say we go for a round 2, and we roll this. Okay, wow, Greeks rolling really, really nicely here. 6 is the highest value. Well, here's a 6 right here. So here's a good example. So both sides rolled a 6. So normally in a tie, both sides would lose a unit, right? However, this is where the asymmetry of the game comes in. The Persians, the highest, any roll that is above 4, so a 5 or a 6, counts as a 4 outside of Persia. So that means that the highest number that the Persians can roll is a 4 on the attack. So in this particular instance, even though they both rolled 6, the Persians actually rolled only a 4, and so the Persians would take another loss. So you can see here that the game is modeling the discipline and fighting capabilities of the Greek hoplites and the Spartans against the Persians. And so you can have sort of in miniature things like the Battle of Marathon, where you've got a massive force of Persians routed by elite Greek troops, which is really cool way to do that. The system kind of reminds me, it's a little bit Sword of Rome, a little bit maybe from some other smaller games that I've played, but it's a really cool feature of the asymmetry of the game. Now that changes in Persia itself. The Persians actually can roll 5s when they're fighting in Persia. So, for example, if there's an amphibious landing by the Greeks, God forbid, then the Persians can, any 5 or 6 that they roll is actually considered a 5. So it's easier for them to defend home territory. So that's combat, and it's very quick to resolve. It's very simple to understand, and it's very tense because you're never quite sure what the odds you need to bring. It's very unpredictable. You're not quite sure what will give you victory. Sometimes, the Greeks get unlucky. They roll low, and even though the Persians can only roll a 4, they'll still win. And yeah, so that's really fun. The end of the movement phase, or at the end of the card play phase, when every side has played cards, we'll go to a supply phase, and this is where both sides are going to count up the number of amphora symbols on cities that they control, and they have to reduce the number of units in excess of that number of amphora from the map. So there's a kind of a supply check, and then you check the actual unit supply back to their home territory. So this Persian unit would need to trace neutral or friendly spaces all the way back to Abydos or to Ephesus, and you can actually trace by sea as well, as long as there's not an enemy ship in the way, for example. But if you're able to cut the supply of a unit, then they are also removed from the game during the supply phase. And then you do a victory check phase, and much like Hannibal, you count up the number of territories you control, in this case the number of cities you control, and you compare it to your opponent, and the difference between the highest player and the lowest player is how many points the player with the most will score. So in the game I played, the Greeks jumped out to a 1-point lead. On the following turn, there was a 2-point lead for the Persians, and on the final turn of the game, it landed right in the middle, and so we had a draw, which I guess historically would be considered a loss for the Persians and their ambitions. It's a really smooth playing game, plays, like I said, in 30 minutes. You actually, most of the time, probably will not play 5 turns. There's an event in the deck for the Persians where if they draw it, it reflects the leader of the Persian Empire dying. So when that happens, you actually just skip the whole turn. And so in our game that we played, we only had 3 turns. So it's possible the game, it feels very strapped. It feels like every decision is important. It feels like every card play is important. There's a lot of really interesting card play between the sides where the events trigger other things about the player's cards. There's combat effects that you can play cards. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of CDG-esque elements to this, even though it's not using the typical ops events, even kind of isn't. So as an example, for example, you got the 300 Spartans card here. So some of the Greek cards are just Greek alliance cards. They're in this lighter red. And then some of the cards specifically are Spartan cards, which have this symbol and are in a darker red. There are some Persian events that can prevent the Greek player from playing Spartan events or even having to discard Spartan events. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening around the maneuver on the map, the cards that you're playing, and the unpredictable combat system. And like I said, there's some one-time use cards in the game that can happen once per game that reflect the different people. Like Leonidas, I believe, is one of the Greek cards. See if I can find him. Here's Artemisia, which is a Greek event, but it affects the Persians because I guess she fled from battle historically. Here's Pausanias. Anyways, it's a small deck, but because of the variability in terms of what you draw every turn, it adds a lot of replayability to the game. So I really enjoy this. I think it's great. I think this game is the perfect travel war game. A lot of the times travel games tend to be too light in that they don't really give a full engaging strategic experience. And I think this game does a really good job of being replayable, but also very engaging with tough decisions that you have to make given the few number of turns and not being able to do everything you want to do on any given campaign. It's 300 Earth and Water. It came out last year from Nuts Publishing, and I think this is one of the finest games that they've ever done. It is perfect for travel. It is perfect for new wargamers. It's even really good for experienced wargamers who want something light or quick or both, but it still has a lot of richness to it. And so I can't recommend this highly enough. I suspect that at the end of the year, like I said, this will be in my top 10 games of 2022, and I'm very glad it's the first game I played in the new year because it's fantastic and I love it. Thanks for watching, and if you have any comments about this game, any questions, happy to answer them for you. Really nice production, I should also mention, with the pieces and the arts and the board. And we'll see you in the next one. Not sure what game that's going to be yet, but I have no shortage of options. So I'll see you then. Bye.